It seems you've been lost in the dark, cold vastness of space for ages. You don't remember what green trees look like. You can recall what fresh morning air smells like. You're about to run out of what little fuel you still have. And then, you see it! A planet! Can it be Earth? Your battered spaceship is moving closer to the planet, and a giant wave of bitter disappointment almost drowns you. This alien world looks nothing like your beautiful blue planet. You get down to work. After thorough research, you realize that the planet in front of your eyes can't be anything else but Kepler 22b, which, in turn, means that you're 635 light-years away from home and are unlikely to ever return to Earth. You need some time to get used to this horrible revelation. When you come back to your senses, you understand that you have to do everything in your power to survive, even if it means living in an unfamiliar, probably hostile world. The only good news in that ocean of desperation is that Kepler 22b is located in the habitable zone of its star, and it means there might be liquid water on its surface. And where there's water, there's also the possibility of life. Your life. Earth's astronomers discovered this exoplanet, which is what all the planets outside the solar system are called, using the transit method. The problem with many exoplanets is that it's hard to spot them since the bright glare of their stars keeps them hidden from our telescopes. But the transit method means that instead of looking for planets, scientists watch the star, Kepler 22. They noticed that over time, its brightness changed. That was because Kepler 22b regularly blocked the star's light. This discovery also helped researchers figure out the size of the planet and the way it orbited its star. It turned out that the planet was 36 times more massive than our planet. If you decide to settle down in this world, this information will probably make you feel even lonelier. Your new home is also 15% nearer to its star than our planet is to the sun. If Earth moved over so close to our star, everything and everyone on the planet would become fried in no time. Consider yourself lucky that the star that is now illuminating your spaceship, lying sideways on the surface of the planet, is smaller and colder than the sun. It means you'll get as much sunlight as you would if you were on Earth. The temperature on your new home planet is quite comfortable, around 60 to 72 degrees F. But don't get your hopes up. You don't know for sure yet, but there's a theory that the planet is rotating on its side, like Uranus in our solar system. What can it mean for you? Unfortunately, nothing good. Even though the position of the planet probably seems insignificant, the complications might be fatal. The problem is that in this case, the north and south poles of Kepler 22b would be either plunged into darkness or illuminated by super bright sunlight for half a year. Now, that wouldn't be a matter of being a daytime or nighttime person. It would mean that temperatures on the planet would change from freezing to boiling all the time, which wouldn't be great for your survival. Anyway, you haven't had enough time to figure out whether this prediction is true. What you have noticed, though, is that your new home is covered with an ocean. You almost dropped into it before resuming control over your spacecraft and landing it on the shore instead. According to your calculations, the ocean might be around 160 feet deep. It might also act as natural climate control, keeping the wild temperatures at bay by storing heat in the summer and releasing it during the winter. But even if it's true, your main concern is food and oxygen. You're running out of your scarce resources at an alarming speed. What are you going to eat on this lifeless planet? How will you get some air to breathe? Your future looks darker and darker with every passing minute. Will the sheer strength of your willpower help you survive? Time will tell.
In the icy wilderness of Antarctica, there was a peculiar rock. Amidst the vast, smooth, and snowy landscape, it stood alone like a dark smudge. This rock had been there for ages, untouched except for occasional snowfall. Roberta Score, a lab manager at NASA's Johnson Space Center, had spent countless hours in Antarctica searching for rocks just like this one. Antarctica was an unexpected treasure trove for these discoveries. These rocks were easy to spot against the blindingly white ice. Why was it so important? Because it wasn't just any rock. It was a meteorite that had fallen from space thousands of years ago. Roberta's rock, known as ALH 84001, was initially unimpressive. However, It turned out to be extraordinary. It was a piece of Mars. The rock's chemical composition perfectly matched the surface of the red planet. Turns out, it had been blasted off Mars during a colossal collision millions of years ago. It was wandering through space before landing on Earth. There, it had remained undisturbed for a very long time. Scientists at Johnson Space Center carefully examined this Martian visitor. Years later, physicists made a remarkable announcement. This meteorite contained tiny structures that looked just like living organisms found on Earth. NASA immediately shared this discovery with the world. We found fossilized evidence of life on Mars. However, as other scientists got their hands on the rock and conducted further studies, they began to doubt it. Yes, it was a fascinating piece of rock, but Martian chemistry might create similar structures without life being involved. So, unfortunately, it wasn't conclusive evidence. But all this debate raised a very important question. Would we recognize extraterrestrial life if we saw it? There are more than 200 different definitions of life in scientific literature. So, what should we be looking for? To figure out what makes something alive, scientists have come up with 3 important things that living things must have. First, living things need to store information about themselves. This information tells them how to work and what they're like. It's a bit like having a set of instructions for how they function. Second, they need to be able to interact with their environment and create reactions. These reactions help them get energy, move around, and respond to changes or dangers. Lastly, they must be able to make copies of themselves, reproducing, and making other things that are just like them. This ability is a big part of what makes something alive. The famous physicist Erwin Schrödinger was one of the first people to figure this out. He said that storing, using, and passing on information is super important for life. It's like a cycle. Information helps create reactions, and some of those reactions let living things make copies of themselves. On Earth, we see this in action. We humans, for example, have DNA to store our information. It helps us with our evolution. Thanks to all this, we can adapt to our surroundings over time. Nature sees that some traits are helpful for survival, so they stick around, while others get left behind. In other words, a way to define life is by saying that it's subject to this process called Darwinian evolution. But how did it happen that things capable of evolution appeared? And when did the very first life emerge in our universe? To find out the answer, let's go to the very beginning of everything. The beginning was the Big Bang. Right after it, there were no stars or galaxies. The universe started as a mostly even and empty place, with just a tiny bit denser than the rest. After the first second or so, first protons, neutrons, and electrons, among other particles, appeared. And just about a couple of minutes later, these protons and neutrons came together to make stable atomic cores. Then, everything was a superhot soup of particles for about 380,000 years. It was way too hot to form anything dense. The universe needed some time to chill. After it calmed down a bit, it let electrons join these cores, forming neutral atoms for the first time. Finally, some comfy temperatures. If we were there, we wouldn't have needed the sun to keep us warm. That cosmic background radiation would have been enough. Could life appear at this point? Probably not. In those early moments after the Big Bang, the universe had only hydrogen, helium, a tiny bit of lithium, and almost none of the other elements life needs. Life, as we know, requires things like water and organic compounds. So it wasn't about the temperatures, it was about the ingredients. Now, everything had to form over time from these atoms. To create something like a planet, which is much denser than the universe on average, it needed a lot of time and gravitational squeezing. Gravity is the real hero of this story. It changed the universe completely. Even though it started slow, it kept going and got stronger. Regions that were a bit denser could pull in more matter, and the denser they got, the more they attracted. The very first star should have formed around 50 to 100 million years after the Big Bang. These stars could become incredibly massive, hundreds or even 1,000 times bigger than our Sun. And when these stars formed, it didn't take long, maybe 1 or 2 million years, before they disappeared. Just for comparison, our own Sun is 4.6 billion years old and still going strong. When huge stars reach the end of their lives, something incredible happens. They transform helium into carbon, then carbon into oxygen, and oxygen into a bunch of other stuff all the way up the periodic table. Then the star's core collapses, causing a massive supernova. This huge BAM releases all these heavy elements into the universe. Hooray! Now the space is filled with something new. The universe acquires many cool things, including the ingredients needed for rocky planets and organic molecules. Each generation of stars gets even richer than the previous one. Yes to more elements. It means more rocky planets, more essential ingredients for life, and more chances for complex organic molecules to form. And now, when the universe was around 300 to 500 million years old, rocky planets were already popping up everywhere. Great. Can we have some life now? That depends on what we see as life. The recipe for life, as we know it, needs a special ingredient, carbon. Carbon is special because it can bond with other atoms in so many ways. It can connect with different shapes to build all sorts of amazing complex structures. It's carbon that helps us form things like DNA and proteins, which are the building blocks of living things. Now, while the universe made rocky planets relatively quickly, it took a bit longer to get enough carbon floating around. It appeared about 1 to 1.5 billion years after the Big Bang. As soon as it appeared, the universe finally had enough conditions to create life as we know it, which is why scientists are searching for planets around these oldest stars in the universe. These guys definitely had enough time for evolution. But just because you and me are made of carbon and other elements from exploded stars, doesn't mean that all life should be. Scientists are open to the idea of alternative biochemistries. There might be non-carbon-based life that we don't know about yet. For example, blobby beings made of silicon compounds. It's carbon's neighbor in the periodic table. So, when and where did life truly begin? Unfortunately, we don't know for sure yet. Most likely, the universe started preparing for life shortly after the first stars formed. And if all life is carbon-based only, then it should have appeared 1 to 1.5 billion years after the Big Bang. The universe is 13.8 billion years old. Looks like it had plenty of time to evolve lots of microorganisms. So even if we made a mistake, and the mysterious meteorite was just a piece of rock, we shouldn't give up. The search for extraterrestrial life continues, and who knows? Maybe in the future, we'll finally know the answers to all these important questions. Until then, stay tuned.
According to the theory of panspermia, life could have been brought to Earth by a meteorite, comet, or asteroid from a different region of space. At the moment, this idea remains purely theoretical. But let's figure out if it could actually turn out to be true. Traditionally, exobiologists, those who are focused on searching for life outside Earth, have been trying to explore the possibility of life on Mars or in the subsurface oceans of Saturn's and Jupiter's icy moons. But simple life could be much more widespread. It could be drifting through interplanetary space right now, in the form of dormant bacteria and spores. Several scientists have noted that the ultra-harsh environment of space is likely to severely damage the DNA and RNA of such spores and microorganisms. Others believe that since enough microbes could be traveling in a dust cloud, some of them could survive in their original form. There are several types of panspermia. For example, lithopanspermia proposes that some kind of microbic life could exist in debris blasted into the cosmos after planetary collisions with comets and asteroids. Radiopanspermia claims that organisms might be able to travel through space with the help of radiation coming from stars. But in this case, it's unclear how the effect of dangerous ultraviolet and X-ray radiation, combined with the vacuum of space, doesn't totally destroy microorganisms. There's also pseudopanspermia. According to it, organic building blocks of life appear in interstellar clouds of dust. They get transported to the surfaces of planets, and life starts developing there. It sounds really fascinating, but is there any evidence for the panspermia theory? Well, there have been a few orbital experiments. For example, from 2008 to 2016, the samples gathered by EXPOSE, special equipment mounted outside the International Space Station and dedicated to astrobiology, were exposed to the conditions of space. After that, they were returned to Earth from the ISS. It turned out that some of them had survived those severe conditions. There was even a case when 100% of bacterial spores placed in Mars-like conditions were still capable of life. Also, some seeds survived and were later grown as plants on Earth. There have also been exostack experiments on the U.S. Long-Duration Exposure Facility satellite and biopan experiments on Russian photon capsules. They have shown that with minimal protection, spores, lichens, and even minuscule animals, such as tardigrades, might be able to survive in space for as long as several years. A piece of Surveyor 3 lunar lander was brought back to Earth in 1969 by the Apollo 12 mission. Shockingly, it contained an Earth bacterium that had survived unprotected for more than 2 years on the airless surface. At the same time, this bacterium could have come from laboratory contamination on arrival back on Earth. The Indian Space Research Organization carried out a search for space microorganisms too. It was done at stratospheric altitudes via balloon flights. The results showed that living interplanetary cells existed in air samples taken from heights of above 25 miles. Normally, air from lower levels of the atmosphere can't be transported there, so this discovery seemed to prove the theory of panspermia. But in 2010, NASA atmospheric sampling before and after hurricanes proved that under certain circumstances, Earth bacteria could actually be transported very high into the upper levels of the atmosphere. One of the main arguments against panspermia is that if this theory was correct, all life found throughout the solar system would have a common origin and share main biochemical characteristics like genetic code. It doesn't sound plausible. Many specialists believe that only the presence of astronaut explorers on the surfaces of, let's say, Mars, Europa, or Enceladus can properly solve the question of life in the solar system. They can compare any life forms found with Earth-type life, which can turn out to be a real test of panspermia. In any case, until probes finally find direct proof of spaceborne life, the panspermia theory will remain unproven.
As scientists continue to explore the vast expanse of the universe, they've made some incredible discoveries that have left them with more questions than answers. From a scorching super-Earth to a football-shaped world, the exoplanet discoveries of 2022 are truly out of this world. So, hold on tight, the future of exoplanet discoveries is looking brighter than ever. Number 1. New type of exoplanets. Red dwarfs make up over 70% of all stars in space. So, in September of 2022, scientists decided to take a closer look at the small worlds orbiting them. What they found was amazing. New type of exoplanets that were made of half rock and half water, either in liquid or ice form. The researchers suggested that these planets likely arose from icy material and were born far away from their stars, past the ice line, where surface temperatures are freezing. But they later migrated closer in, to where the astronomers detected them. This discovery could have huge implications in the search for life in the cosmos. Though these planets are loaded with water, they might not be covered in oceans. Who knows? Maybe one of them will be the next Earth 2.0. Number 2. Jupiter-sized world. Imagine a planet so massive and mysterious, it's like a hidden Jupiter in our galaxy. Well, we just discovered one of those orbiting a star just 379 light-years away. Just. We've named it the TOI 2180b, and it's got everyone talking. Why? Well, for starters, this planet takes a whopping 261 days to orbit its star, which is much longer than most distant gas giants we've come across so far. But that's not all. The temperature on this world is surprisingly mild, averaging at a balmy 170 degrees Fahrenheit. For comparison, the temperature on Jupiter and Saturn is around minus 280 degrees. It's like a bridge between the giant exoplanets we've found and our Jupiter. But the question remains, how did this planet get to be so different? Scientists are still trying to figure that out. Let's hope that we get some answers soon. Number 3. The Hulk Planet. This world is a place where the surface is covered in molten magma, and the year lasts just half a day. Welcome to TOI 1075b, an exoplanet that's been dubbed the planet Hulk by scientists. Located 200 light-years away, this super-Earth is one of the most massive ever discovered. Its proximity to its parent star causes its surface to reach scorching temperatures of 1922 degrees. It's so hot that any form of water would evaporate instantly, and the air would be filled with vaporized rock. But it's not just the heat that's impressive, it's also its size. TOI 1075b is nearly 10 times the mass of Earth, making it one of the most massive super-Earths ever discovered. But the mystery doesn't stop there. The planet's orbit takes just 14.5 hours, making it one of the shortest orbital periods ever recorded for a planet of its size. What an exciting addition to our catalog! Number 4. 3 doomed planets. Astronomers made a shocking discovery of 3 planets that are circling in a dangerous dance next to the slowly fading stars. Just a decade ago, scientists never even imagined such planets could exist. These gas giant planets, similar in size to Jupiter, orbit way too close to their slowly fading stars. They're basically walking on the edge. Take one of them, for example, dubbed TOI 2337b. Its orbit will likely send it hurtling straight into the fiery arms of its host star in less than 1 million years. Well, I won't be around then. As these stars enter their final days, they're pulling in nearby planets like a black hole, altering their orbits and potentially causing catastrophic collisions. And as these planets get closer to their stars, their atmospheres heat up and swell, leading to some mind-boggling differences in density. But despite the doom and gloom, studying these worlds could give us valuable insights into the evolution of our own solar system. Number 5. Planet with a barium's atmosphere. These are 2 hot blazing planets, each with an atmosphere made of the heaviest element ever found in an exoplanet, barium. These planets, known as WASP-76b and WASP-121b, are ultra-hot gas giants called superjupiters that orbit incredibly close to their stars. These planets are basically like giant balls of fire, with one side facing the star, cooking at temperatures hot enough to vaporize iron and other metals. But as the hot iron vapor is blown into the planet's cooler night side, it turns into liquid and falls as iron rain. And these planets held a special surprise for us. Barium is a heavy metal, about 2.5 times as heavy as iron. And yet, scientists were able to detect it in the upper layers of these planets' atmospheres. This is truly a mystery, and a puzzle we're still trying to solve. Imagine landing on a planet like this and looking at this rain of iron and the heavy barium in its skies. That would be awesomely horrifying. Number 6. The Football Planet. Get ready to have your mind blown, space enthusiasts, because we've just discovered the ultimate football-shaped planet, and it's unlike anything we've ever seen before. Meet WASP-103b, the ultra-hot exoplanet that's more than 1,000 light-years away from Earth. This gas giant is so close to its parent star that its shape is being stretched by the intense gravitational forces. But this isn't just a fun shapeshifter. It's also a valuable scientific discovery. By studying the planet's passes across its star, we were able to measure its deformation for the first time ever. It's like taking a snapshot of a planet in motion, and it's giving us insights into the extreme conditions that these planets can endure. This is truly a great discovery. Number 7. A zodiacal light. Are you ready for a cosmic ghost story? Scientists and high school students in China have uncovered a spooky phenomenon on 3 distant exoplanets. It's called zodiacal light, a glow that's similar to the one seen here on Earth during sunset. But this isn't just some eerie light show. It could hold clues about the makeup of these potentially habitable worlds. Imagine watching the sunset from a dark spot on Earth, and instead of darkness, a triangle of light appears. That's zodiacal light. It's caused by sunlight reflecting off dust particles that fill the solar system, the remains of asteroids and comets. A team of researchers analyzed 47 potential habitable exoplanets named Kepler 69c, Kepler 1229b, and Kepler 395c, all super-Earths, had signs of this light. This discovery is more than just a spooky phenomenon. It could reveal information about the presence of asteroids and comets in these exoplanet systems, which could be difficult to detect otherwise. So that's pretty neat. Number 8. A planet with silicate clouds. Introducing VHS 1259b, not a home video recording system, but a strange and exotic world shrouded in mystery and wonder. A place where the clouds are made of sand and the sky is forever red. This isn't the stuff of science fiction, but a real-life discovery made by the brilliant minds at NASA. This is a brown dwarf exoplanet that's making waves in the astronomical community. It's way too massive for a planet, nearly 20 times the size of Jupiter, but it's not quite a star. It's something in between, a cosmic enigma that defies definition. But what's really crazy about VHS 1256b is its atmosphere. Scientists have discovered that this strange world is cloaked in thick clouds of silicate grains, similar to sand. It's the first time this kind of cloud has ever been detected on an exoplanet, and it's a discovery that's sure to change the way we think about the universe and the possibilities of life beyond our world. And there you have it, folks. The year 2022 was filled with incredible discoveries and groundbreaking findings in the world of exoplanets. But this is just the beginning, as scientists and researchers continue to explore the vast expanse of space. We can only imagine what other wonders await us. So, let's keep looking. Who knows what secrets the stars hold for us next? Okay, here you are, in the middle of the ocean. It's endless, but you can't see it, because there's a thick fog all around you. Dense clouds hide the huge but dim sun. Is it day or night? You don't know. There's only a gray haze around you. You're alone. Even if you try to swim down, after several hours, you still won't be able to see the bottom of the ocean. And that's a typical water planet for you. I know, sounded kind of dark, but it's not that bad. These water worlds are more interesting than they may seem, so let's take a look at them. The ocean planet is a planet that consists, as you might have guessed, mainly of water, ice, and maybe some rocks. Think of the Earth's oceans. Its horrifying depths, the Mariana Trench, and all that. And now, can you guess how much space all the water on Earth takes up? 0.025%, exactly. Now, just try to imagine a world of 40 to 60% water. If you dive in there, the depth can exceed 60 miles. Compared to that, the 6-mile depth of our Mariana Trench sounds like nothing. And yeah, the pressure there will be enormous. It can reach up to 20,000 Earth atmospheres. Very crushing. Now, it may sound scary, but it still would be great to find out more about these planets. Fortunately, according to scientists' calculations, there may be a lot of such planets in our galaxy alone. Well, you don't have to go far. You can find these water guys even in our solar system. Not planets, of course, but moons. Jupiter has Ganymede and Callisto, and Saturn has Titan and Enceladus. The ocean can reach up to 30% of the mass of these moons, although it isn't clear whether these oceans are covered with a thick crust of ice. But we've discovered quite a few full-fledged ocean planets. This is because the conditions in which these planets may exist are very specific. For example, this planet should be somewhere 6 to 8 times larger than the Earth. If it's smaller, it'll have a rocky surface, but if it's bigger, it'll turn into a gas giant. At the same time, it must be in the habitable zone of its star. A little further, and the planet immediately turns into an icy giant or a cold super-Earth. So yeah, these guys are very picky. We first started exploring these planets back in the 1970s. However, since then, we've found only a couple of them, but they're still very interesting. The first planet is Gliese 1214b. It was the very first ocean planet that we discovered. Initially, the scientists noticed only a small dim dot. This dot turned out to be the red dwarf star Gliese 1214. An unremarkable, completely ordinary star that's 5 times smaller than our Sun and 300 times dimmer. Scientists wouldn't worry about it at all, but back in 2009, they noticed that this star had one single planet, and this planet turned out to be quite strange. This super-Earth was 2.5 times bigger than our Earth and 6.5 times heavier, but at the same time, it had a very, very small density and about the same gravity as our planet. In other words, there were almost no rocks and metals on it. But it wasn't a gas giant either. So there was only one option left. It was covered in water and ice. And that's how we discovered the first ocean planet. Well, actually, we can only assume that it consists of water. That's what the mathematical calculations say. In reality, this planet is quite confusing. It's difficult to explore, and so far, scientists haven't been able to find anything there. No hydrogen, no helium, no water, nada. That's because the outer layer of the atmosphere of this planet is very dense, and it perfectly hides its composition. But even so, it's probably a water world. Gliese 1214b is very close to its star. It's only 0.014 astronomical units away, which is less than the distance between the Moon and us. The year there lasts about 36 hours, and the temperatures, to put it mildly, are just wild. Scientists suggest that the average temperature there can reach 250 to 535 degrees Fahrenheit. Woo, that's hot. Remember the creepy description from the beginning? Well, actually, spending time on Gliese 1214b would be a little different, more like swimming in a steam boiler. Because of such gigantic temperatures, the ocean on the surface will be constantly in a state close to boiling without actually reaching it. So, imagine that you're descending to the surface of this planet, flying through clouds of steam, and then you suddenly find yourself in the water. What? But when did it happen? Well, that's because the boundary between steam and water on Gliese 1214b will be very blurred. Of course, you won't be able to swim to the bottom of this ocean, but most likely, this bottom is covered with a very thick layer of so-called hot ice. It's like regular ice, but it doesn't really care about the laws of physics, so it just doesn't melt even at gigantic temperatures. And the thickness of this ice can reach as much as 3,000 miles. So that's it for the creepy Gliese 1214b, and not an Airbnb in sight. Now, although we can't 100% guarantee that it's a water world, we still have another candidate for this position. A newly discovered planet called TOI 1452b. This planet, located in the Dragon constellation, is almost 100 light-years away from us. It was discovered using the TESS telescope by a group of researchers from the University of Montreal. This planet also belongs to the class of super-Earths. It's 7 times larger than our planet, but 48 times heavier. Again, all this is at a very low density. Because of this, scientists have suggested that almost the entire planet consists of a giant ocean. Here, we were a little luckier. This world won't be just a giant puddle in some thick ice. On this planet, there's probably a rocky surface deep under the water, just like in a typical ocean. Don't get too excited though, this ocean will certainly be very different from what we're used to. TOI 1452b also orbits a small red dwarf, and not even one, but 2 at once. At the same time, if the previous planet was close to its sun, then this one, on the contrary, is very, very far away. It's 2.5 times farther from its stars than Pluto is from the sun, and it moves at great speed. A year there lasts only 11 days. But we still don't know many things about this planet. We'll probably get some new information when scientists observe it from the James Webb Telescope. Well, that's it. Wait, did you expect something else? All right, I know the question that bothers you the most. Can there be life? Well, this is a difficult question. We all know that water means life, and besides, these planets are in the habitable zones of their stars. So, potentially, yes, there might be life. Not some full-fledged civilizations, of course, but bacteria, fish, and some creepy giant monsters. I mean, why not? However, this is very unlikely. Water alone isn't enough to create life, even though it's very important. There should also be some microelements and some minerals. And unfortunately, for most water planets, the composition will only consist of water and very thick ice. There won't be any minerals there. But don't give up. There's still some probability. First of all, there are meteorites and comets. They can bring the necessary minerals to the planet. The more often they crash into it, the higher the probability that they'll bring something like this into the ocean and thus create life. Secondly, TOI 1452b actually has these minerals. Yes, we don't know how deep the rocky bottom is located there. But if it exists, then surely something could have originated there. Let's hope that new research with powerful telescopes will allow us to find out the truth. And who knows? Maybe one day we'll be able to visit such a planet ourselves.
It's a clear night, and you're outside looking at the stars. The Milky Way alone seems overwhelmingly huge. You check on your phone and discover that the galaxy you're in at this exact moment is 100,000 light-years wide. For scale, 1 light-year is already a very long distance. For example, it takes 4.2 light-years to go from Earth to Proxima Centauri, which is the closest star to our planet other than the Sun. So, 100,000 light-years is way more than we normal humans can fathom. And that's just one galaxy. There's a whole lot more out there. Now, looking at this data, it seems pretty unlikely that we're the only life form out there, doesn't it? But how come we've never found anything else so far? Let's get one thing out of the way. Extraterrestrial life doesn't necessarily mean we're talking about little green people. It can also mean microorganisms, bacteria, and plants that can be found on other planets. The truth is, there's a big spectrum of possibilities for life on another planet. And taking into consideration that there are up to 50 billion planets in the Milky Way, it's very unlikely that we're alone in this big wide universe. And what does life on other planets look like? This is what we've spent years trying to figure out. Go ahead, think with me. A planet may be lifeless today, but it could have traces of organic matter or fossils, meaning that some life form was able to thrive there once. And it could also be that there are planets out there containing life with complex biochemistry, meaning they could have fauna just like we have on Earth, although probably not the same. NASA created a special science that is dedicated to studying life forms outside of Earth. It's called astrobiology. Ever since the space agency was created back in 1958, it didn't take long for it to start looking for extraterrestrial life. They quickly built an action plan. First, they needed to understand how life on Earth was formed, and secondly, how it could have formed on other planets. The first time NASA tried to look for life in outer space was in 1976. The Viking lander blasted into space, headed towards Mars. There were high expectations that humanity would find the first proof of extraterrestrial life. Unfortunately, the lander came back with images of a planet that looked barren and bleak, and scientists were extremely disappointed. Scientific conclusions on whether life could be detected over there were confusing. But hey, you need to know what you're looking for to find it, right? The failure of the Viking mission served to heat up debates amongst NASA scientists to define what life actually meant. And it also served to call their attention to a small but very important detail. Spacecrafts departing from Earth usually transport Earthling microorganisms and bacteria unintentionally, as they remain attached to the vehicle. It turned out that these bacteria could contaminate scientists' samples, so they needed to consider this. All of this made Mars expeditions take a back burner on NASA's short-term plans. There appeared a new priority-first question. What are the types and stages of life that space programs can hope to identify? Scientists might have encountered life on other planets, but they weren't able to identify it as life. That is why NASA began to study our own planet better. They studied everything from ancient life forms that lived billions of years ago
To living creatures that roam the planet today, they understood that the search needed to happen inwards as well as outwards. Let's take a look at the development of Earth's life from its inception. Imagine that this development can be represented as a ladder, or stairs, and each developmental stage is a flight of the bigger staircase. First, we would see basic chemistry, a soup of loose chemical elements like the ones we see in the periodic table. But they need to assemble themselves into more complex structures to be able to self-replicate, change, and evolve. This would happen in the second step, where we start to see the formation of microscopic organisms. In the third step, these cells combine to become multicellular beings, allowing for more complexity and variety. The step above sees species that can evolve big brains, enabling the use of tools, culture, and shared knowledge. That's where humanity is located. Looking at this ladder, one might ask, so what does it take for a multicellular organism to evolve into fully formed humans? This is what is called the Great Filter. It's a huge evolutionary jump that takes a lot of effort and the perfect environmental conditions for it to happen. And given that we haven't heard of any other extraterrestrial civilizations out there, it might be that we're the only ones that were able to make this jump. After all, how likely is it that we'll find life outside of Earth that is similar to us? That depends on how many planets there are out there in their star's Goldilocks zone, the area around a star where water can be liquid. And because stars come in all sizes and configurations, this zone is different for every star system. But that's not the only criteria we know for the existence of life. We usually look for three things to detect life: liquid water, methane, and oxygen. Water is what allows for chemical components to mingle and connect, forming multicellular beings. Methane is produced by the decomposition process made by bacteria, and oxygen is the byproduct of plant respiration. These are some of the telltale signs that the James Webb Telescope was programmed to search for. The James Webb Telescope has ambitious purposes that might revolutionize space science. Its top priorities are to detect forms of life by studying small galaxies orbiting the Milky Way. It will also look for the oldest stars in the universe, trying to gather data on the origin of the universe itself. That's huge! NASA is betting on two variables with this new telescope: a thorough scan on the so-called exoplanets, aka planets from outside our solar system, and the search for extremophiles, a type of life that loves extreme environments. Extremophiles were first discovered on planet Earth back in the 1960s at the bottom of the sea near the Galapagos Islands. Scientists found microorganisms living next to hydrothermal vents that dot the sea floor over that part of the world. Thriving in places like these with extreme temperatures over 700 degrees Fahrenheit takes a lot of resistance. I mean, can you imagine the heat? This discovery was a turning point for the field of astrobiology, as scientists understood that life could survive in extremely harsh conditions, similar to the atmosphere available in several exoplanets. But hey, life might turn up in our own neighborhood if we're lucky enough. Guided by the mantra, "Follow the water," NASA is launching two important missions inside our solar system that can contribute largely to the search for extraterrestrial life. You remember Jupiter, right? It's the gas giant that has a moon known as Europa. A few years ago, scientists discovered that Europa had an ocean hidden behind layers of icy crust. And there's even more. According to research, the water over in Europa is salty, much like the water we have on our planet. Europa is a big contender for the detection of life. But the Europa Clipper mission is not aimed at trying to identify this. Rather, it will orbit the moon and gather as much information about its atmospheric conditions as it can. The other moon-bound mission is the Dragonfly, an octocopter that will explore Saturn's moon Titan. The launch is programmed for 2027 and will only arrive in Titan's orbit around 2034. It will sample and examine a series of promising sites around Saturn's icy moon. And who knows, find some new information on ET life? Let's see what happens. But I'd say we've never been closer to a huge discovery than we are now.
Life originated in water, or so we always heard. In reality, it could have begun in ice. We know that it all started more than 3 billion years ago with simple microbes, and it's been evolving ever since. However, there are many theories about how exactly it happened. Maybe not heat, but cold was the beginning of everything. Cells were the first tiny life forms, but before we had fully developed cells, there were simpler things that couldn't survive on their own. Certain important chemicals for life, like the mentioned amino acids, usually float in water in tiny amounts. First, they needed something to help them stay together without spreading all over the place. Otherwise, they would have gotten lost in the sea. And second, they needed to stick together in groups to form more complex things. Moreover, when they started to form in groups, they started the process of evolution. They chose the best molecules to do specific tasks and kicked out the faulty ones. Without this organization, the fastest replicators, or parasites, would have taken over. There were several ways they could organize themselves. 3 billion years ago, oceans were covered in ice. And it turned out that certain important chemicals for life, such as amino acids and nucleic acids, are more stable in colder temperatures. When water freezes, these chemicals that hang out in the oceans get packed together, making it easier for life to form. Or maybe what helped them were special spots called hydrothermal vents. Imagine the deepest, darkest parts of the ocean floor, where hot water shoots out from cracks in the Earth's crust. Life might have started right there, in these extreme conditions. These vents spew out important elements like carbon and hydrogen, which are crucial for life. As the superheated water travels through the Earth's crust, it picks up other important stuff like minerals. When it finally bursts out of the vents, it creates a kind of soup rich in chemicals. In the rocky crevices around these vents, all these molecules could have come together and sparked the first signs of life. The hot, mineral-rich environment acted like a kitchen to cook the first recipes ever for living things. Even today, these vents are home to vibrant ecosystems, showing that life can thrive in extreme conditions. Ancient stories also talk about life starting from clay. It turns out that this idea has a scientific basis too. Imagine tiny particles of clay, like little grains of sand, sticking together in a structured way. As they grow and get bigger, they keep their original shape intact. They form bigger areas and clumps. They become kind of like patches, clay clumps with tiny holes inside. Each patch may be exposed to different things in the environment, like different chemicals or substances. When these outside molecules go through the clay, they get trapped along the way. Once trapped, these molecules get organized in specific patterns within the clay. This process is compared to how our genes organize things. Just like genes tell our bodies how to arrange different parts, the clay patches organize molecules. This theory was created back in the 80s, although it was very controversial at the time. We need more investigation to figure out whether this is true or not. Ancient people could have been onto something when they said that we all started with Zeus's lightning. Life itself is a chemical reaction, and it needs energy. Without energy, nothing happens. Cells are the building blocks of life. You can picture these cells as tiny factories bustling with activity, constantly working to keep you alive. Just like every factory needs a power source to keep its machines running smoothly, they need energy to do their job. In the world of cells, that power source is something called ATP, which stands for adenosine triphosphate. It's an organic molecule. There are also some backup generators with fancy names like thioesters, acyl phosphates, and reduced ferredoxin. They basically work like extra boosts. When life first started, it needed energy to make complex stuff like proteins and DNA. Back then, this energy came from the environment. It could be light, heat, chemicals, or even lightning. That lightning might have kick-started life. Back in the 1950s, scientists did something called the Miller-Urey experiment. They zapped a mix of gases that mimicked Earth's early atmosphere with electric sparks. Suddenly, that caused amino acids and sugars, the basic stuff of life, to pop out. All living things share a special code called DNA, the genetic code. It's one of the oldest and most important things about life. And we think this code existed in the very first forms of life too. This code is quite tricky. It involves putting the right building blocks, amino acids, together in the right order. And there are special molecules called tRNA and mRNA that help with this process. The early version of this code was probably simpler than what we have now. It might have used shorter instructions like using just 2 letters instead of 3. Scientists are still figuring out how DNA first appeared at all. Some think it might have started alongside metabolism, where certain molecules helped put the right building blocks together. Now, they think that the secret to understanding how DNA and proteins are formed lies in looking at RNA. RNA is a versatile player, a molecule that can do some of the jobs of both DNA and proteins. In the past, it could have been the star before DNA and proteins took over. And even though they're the main players now, RNA still has important roles in living things. For example, it can switch genes on and off, controlling how cells behave. But then comes the next question. How did RNA come to be? Well, we need to look for even simpler origins. RNA are big and complicated molecules, but life could have begun with smaller ones bumping into each other and starting chemical reactions. These reactions might have happened inside tiny capsules that acted like cell membranes. Over time, they might have evolved into more complex ones that could do the job better. In other words, life could have started with a basic recipe and slowly added more ingredients. Every living thing is made of carbon. Carbon is an essential life block. It's the stuff that makes molecules, and they form cells, tissues, and organs. Earth was very different many years ago. There were no plants or trees, and the air was different too. Instead of the oxygen we breathe now, there were gases like hydrogen, nitrogen, hydrogen sulfide, and of course, carbon dioxide, which contained carbon. In this ancient world, life might have started in a way where organisms didn't eat other organisms for energy. Perhaps they made their own food from these simple chemicals. They could eat this carbon dioxide, kind of like plants do today, and this is where they receive their carbon from. We call this autotrophic origin. They think that certain metals like iron and nickel, along with minerals containing them, played a big role in this process. These metals and minerals acted like assistants, helping chemical reactions happen that were important for life to begin. They were found all over the Earth back then, especially in places where there wasn't much oxygen. And finally, we have a wild theory that life didn't start on Earth at all. It could have been brought to us from somewhere else. Rocks from Mars sometimes get blasted into space by big cosmic collisions. Some of these rocks have ended up on Earth, carrying tiny microbes with them. So maybe, while we search for life on Mars, it could have been the red planet that started our very own life. Or maybe it wasn't Mars. Others suggest that life might have hitched a ride on comets from other star systems, traveling through space until they landed here. But if life did come from somewhere else, it just raises more questions. For example, How did life start in space in the first place? This is why scientists are a bit skeptical about this idea, which is called panspermia. In any case, the origins of life are a huge mystery, and we'll need decades of research to figure out the full answer.
Your car breaks down in the middle of the highway and won't start. A friendly driver pulls over nearby and gets out some jumper cables connecting your car to his. A few sparks, and your car comes back to life. And that's how life began on Earth. Sort of. There's a theory that life was jump-started on Earth like this billions of years ago. It all started with clouds in the sky. We've all been there, sitting by the window on a rainy day. You wanted to go out and have fun, but the rain pouring outside made you want to stay in bed and snuggle. Still, the lightning and thunder are keeping you awake. With nothing better to do, you think about how lightning even forms. Like I said, clouds, and many other things. You see, when a storm occurs, cold air and warm air meet. The warm air goes up to create thunderstorm clouds, which produce droplets, and the cold air below has ice crystals in it. During a storm, the droplets and crystals have a little mosh pit and move all around. All that bumping and grinding creates electrical charges in the clouds. If you ever replaced batteries on a remote, then you've seen a plus and minus sign on either end of the battery. The plus is where the positive charge is, and the minus is home to the negative one. And just like batteries, clouds have their own plus and minus. The positive charges are kept at the top, and the minus is, you guessed it, at the bottom. So when the charge at the bottom generates enough power, the cloud lets out energy. As the energy travels through the air, it seeks out positively charged objects, like a pole or a tree. And when it finds it, the energy is released and lightning strikes. These bolts of lightning can hit anything on the ground or travel from cloud to cloud. And thunder occurs because of the hot and rapidly expanding air. So, billions of years ago, the Earth wasn't quite like today. Thunderstorms were a lot more frequent than now, and life was still in its beta phase of things. These lightning bolts may have been the key to kickstart life by producing one of the most important minerals for life, phosphorus. DNA, RNA, and cell membranes wouldn't exist without it. It's essential in all stages of our life, from growth and mobility to reproduction. Everything that makes up who we are is in our DNA, those twirly things with proteins latched onto them. So what do lightning bolts and phosphorus have to do with each other? Does phosphorus flash in the sky whenever a thunderstorm happens? Not really. When lightning strikes the ground, it creates something called fulgurites, or in English, glassy minerals fused in the heat caused by the lightning. And when they appear, they take on the shape of the lightning bolt when it strikes the ground. Some new studies suggest that fulgurites could release phosphorus when dissolved in water. When doing so, phosphorus is able to form biomolecules, which help in forming life. Back then, volcanoes were also pretty big on erupting frequently. So, with ancient hot springs, you'd expect lightning to strike down nearby and produce fulgurites next to those hot sources of water. Scientists were able to estimate that during the early days of Earth, 1 to 5 billion lightning flashes were able to occur. So, in the next billion years or so, we can expect 1 quintillion lightning strikes. Yeah, that's a lot of zeros. With all those flashes and strikes, phosphorus was able to grab its chance to start life when dissolved in water. And of course, not just phosphorus, but a mix of many chemicals and minerals were needed to perfect this recipe. Another theory on how life began on Earth starts all the way in outer space, far away from our little blue planet. Flying through the vastness of space were meteorites. Life on Earth began roughly 4 billion years ago, and these meteorites were busy flying all over the place, with many of them hitting Earth in its earliest shape. Scientists claim these meteorites carried chemicals essential to creating life. Some of those important ingredients were carbon-based compounds, including sugars and amino acids. And they needed wet and dry cycles to bond on a molecular level to finalize the process. So once life was injected into Earth, we got to see the first organisms that were around 3.7 billion years ago. Keep in mind, there wasn't much oxygen floating around, or in the water compared to now. But these microscopic organisms, or microbes, left their mark with a certain carbon molecule produced by living things. But life as we know it today wouldn't happen without oxygen, that invisible element that keeps everything alive. So around 2.4 billion years ago, these microbes began changing and became Earth's first photosynthesizers. They made their lunch and dinner using water and the sun rays while releasing oxygen in the process. With many of these new organisms, the rise of oxygen made the environment harsher for microbes, but it was starting to become the baseline for life's groovy track. A new party popped out for those who could dig oxygen. You see, mammals and other organisms have multiple cell types: bone cells, skin cells, muscle cells, you name it. These microbes were single-celled organisms, so with the rise of oxygen, many of these microbes began moving in with other microbes. I don't mean being roommates in a shared apartment. They actually merged with other microbes to become multi-celled organisms. Pretty clever, huh? Fast forward a couple billion years, and we have some of our first animals to ever exist. So actually, around 800 million years ago, the oxygen levels in the ocean and seas still weren't as high as they are today. But one of the earliest creatures on Earth were sponges. Scientists were able to determine this by studying DNA on rock samples dating back to when sponges first appeared. They also claim that sponges sped up the rise of oxygen levels by eating bacteria, removing them in their decomposition phase. Then, around 580 million years ago, more creatures began to appear. The oxygen levels were starting to be acceptable for life to flourish, and many other bizarre-looking creatures inhabited the ocean floor. Even the oldest kind of jellyfish were around. They looked like tiny aliens from another planet. I wouldn't want to find any of those in my drink. And around 40 million years after the end of that period, many of these strange creatures began to disappear. It was then that scientists were able to find evidence of worm-like creatures that were able to burrow in the ocean floor. This is probably one of the first signs of evolution for survival. Then, around 530 million years ago, evolution cranked it up a notch. There were many new creatures out there with new and never-before-seen body parts. Shells and spines and other body parts allowed some of these new animals to further survive and burrow their way around the ocean floor. And shortly after, a couple of million years, the first true primitive vertebrae appeared in something that looks like an eel. This was the creature with the first backbone. Over the next million years, many of these animals began to form skeleton-based and cartilage bodies. And after much splitting, amphibians appeared, and four-legged animals began to walk the Earth's surface. It's also worth noting that there were many mass extinctions that happened along the way. But in the end, life kept evolving. And with many plants and animals emerging, the landscape was changing in the process. Many natural disasters occurred along with ice ages that froze the land and seas. To add to the overall chaos, plenty of volcanic eruptions and earthquakes continued to change the look and landscape of the Earth. The first primates emerged around 4 million years ago, and ever since then, apes and monkeys began to branch out into their own category until humans eventually came into the picture. By understanding these theories, scientists are able to observe other planets with similar conditions. We could actually witness the birth of life on another planet. Of course, this would take billions of years to happen, but I wouldn't want to miss it.
Ah, well-deserved vacay, finally. This time you're off to see something new. It's an ocean on one of the Uranus's moons. All right, just kidding. This destination is not a vacation spot yet. But yeah, there are definitely some impressive oceans out there. Hey, don't say you thought oceans can only be found on Earth. But before diving into Uranus Moon's oceans, let's talk about Uranus itself first. The seventh planet from the Sun and the coolest cat in the solar system. It's got 27 moons, and 4 of them might technically have oceans. That's more than most people have friends. All these moons are like Uranus's mini-me's. They tilt at the same crazy angle as their parent planet, 98 degrees to be exact. And Uranus is so unique that it orbits the Sun on its side. That means its equator is almost at a right angle to its orbit. Talk about rebellious. But why is Uranus like this? Well, some astronomers reckon it's because it got knocked on its side by a massive collision with another planet. And that impact might have actually created Uranus's moons. Fun fact, those moons have pretty particular names. Instead of mythical figures, most of them are named after Shakespearean characters. I mean, who needs Zeus when you've got Juliet and Desdemona? Discovering these moons isn't easy. They're super dark and located billions of miles away from the sun. It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, except the needle is smaller than your pinky finger. These 27 satellites are divided into 3 groups: 13 inner moons, 5 major moons, and 9 irregular moons. The irregular ones are rebels with retrograde orbits, while the others are prograde and go with the flow of Uranus. The big boys are Miranda, Ariel, Umbriel, Titania, and Oberon, and they're all in Uranus's equatorial plane and are big enough to be round. They've got craters and canyons and cliffs. Oh my. These moons also formed from a giant impact that tilted Uranus on its axis. That's why they're all tilted too. And because of that tilt, they have crazy seasonal cycles just like Uranus itself. But we haven't found all of Uranus's moons yet. The little irregular ones are sneaky and hard to detect, so who knows how many more there could be. But let's talk about the really cool stuff, what these moons are made of. We're not entirely sure, but we think they're made of rock and ice. Miranda is the most icy one, while the inner moons are probably just dusty. And the ones beyond Oberon's orbit, they're likely captured asteroids that could be rocky, or icy, or who knows what. But here's what really sets Uranus's moons apart. They're all tilted together with Uranus. That's wild. Exploring these moons could teach us so much about how ocean worlds form and stay active. Titania is the biggest moon of Uranus, but it's still less than half the size of Earth's moon with a diameter of about 1,000 miles. It's also the 8th heaviest moon in the whole solar system. They named it after the fairy queen in A Midsummer Night's Dream. Titania's color is gray, and it has some shiny patches that scientists think are frost. It's made up of a mix of ice and rock, just like all the other moons close to Uranus. Oberon is the next biggest moon of Uranus, named after the fairy king in Shakespeare's play. It's almost the same size as Titania, and also has a half-ice/half rock composition. But Oberon's surface is way more cratered than the other Uranian moons. Umbriel and Ariel are the 3rd and 4th largest moons of Uranus, with diameters of 726 miles and 718 miles respectively. Umbriel is named after a bad spirit in an old poem, and it's the darkest of all Uranus's big moons. It only reflects 16% of the light that hits it. Scientists don't know why it's so dark, but they think a bright ring around a crater might be caused by frost deposits. Ariel is the brightest of all Uranus's big moons, and it reflects over 1/3 of the light that hits it. It's named after characters in both Pope's poem and Shakespeare's play. Ariel looks like the youngest moon because it only has a few small craters from recent collisions. Miranda is the smallest of all these big moons with a diameter of about 292 miles. NASA says it looks like it's made up of parts from different bodies, like a Frankenstein's monster. Miranda has 3 big features called coronae that are unique to it. They're lightly cratered with ridges and valleys, and they're separated from older and more heavily cratered parts of Miranda by sharp boundaries. It also has giant canyons that are up to 12 times deeper than the Grand Canyon. Scientists don't know why Miranda has such different features, but one theory is that it got smashed apart by a huge collision and then put back together all wonky. All these big Uranian moons are stuck facing Uranus all the time, just like Earth's moon. Uranus has got some seriously dope features, but the ring system is where it's at. And get this, the ice giant's moons actually have a hand in shaping those rings. Uranus has 13 inner moons and 13 faint rings, and they're all connected like one big cosmic family. Cordelia and Ophelia are like the guardians of the outermost ring, Epsilon. These 2 shepherd moons keep all the particles together, with Cordelia being the closest to Uranus's surface. But here's the kicker. There are at least 8 other tiny satellites hanging around in that area, making things super crowded. NASA is still scratching their heads trying to figure out how they don't all crash into each other. The inner moons are half ice and half rock, but we don't know much about the outer ones. NASA thinks they might just be asteroids that got caught up in Uranus's gravitational pull. Either way, Uranus and its moon squad are definitely out of this world. Apparently, Uranus's moons might have salty oceans hiding under their frozen surfaces, and the farthest ones from Uranus, Titania, and Oberon could have oceans that are 30 miles deep. That's deeper than the Mariana Trench, 7 miles. But even Ariel and Umbriel might have oceans around 19 miles deep. NASA used some fancy computer modeling and revisited data from their Voyager 2 spacecraft, launched way back in 1977, to figure out the makeup and structure of these moons. They found that Titania is huge enough to keep its internal heat and prevent its ocean from freezing. But get this, the other moons might have a chance at having warm oceans too. The researchers discovered potential sources of heat in the moon's rocky mantles that could release hot liquid and keep the oceans warm. And guess what? The oceans might even be warm enough to theoretically support life. The study also found that chlorides and ammonia are likely abundant in the oceans of these moons. Ammonia acts as antifreeze, and salts in the water could also help maintain the ocean's temperature. Now you might be thinking, how can these icy moons have liquid water? Well, turns out their internal heat and some chemicals could make it happen. For example, a study revealed that chlorides and ammonia are likely abundant in the oceans of these moons. Ammonia acts as an antifreeze, and salts in the water could also help maintain the ocean's temperature. And if these moons really do have oceans, that means there could be other ocean worlds in our solar system and beyond. But don't get too excited. These oceans are pretty salty. About 150 grams of salt for every liter of water. That may not be saltier than Utah's Great Salt Lake, but still. As for Uranus's fifth biggest moon, Miranda, welp, it might have had an ocean at some point, but it probably froze over pretty quickly. Poor little guy. Anyway, NASA is thinking about sending a mission to Uranus to learn more about these icy giants and their moons. They're calling it the Uranus Orbiter and Probe, UOP. Sounds like a party to me. So yeah, technically there might be not 4 but even 5 oceans, but there's still much to learn and explore.